Hello and welcome. Thank you everyone who has joined us online this morning, this afternoon, and tonight. This event, Enhancing Climate Resilience by Building the Capacity of Youth in Water, is being brought to you by the Global Water Partnership, the International Secretariat for Water, the World Federation of Engineering Organizations, Global Young Engineers Working Group on Climate Action as well. This session will be moderated by myself, Rihanna Gonzalez, the Water Resources Specialist, Youth Engagement at the Global Water Partnership, as well as Michele, Engineer Tonkin and Taylor, and a member of the WFEO Global Young Engineers Working Group on Climate Action. So for the past week, there have been numerous youth advocating for calling for action all over the world. Young people are actively proposing and implementing inspiring, innovative ideas and creating their own spaces to advocate, design, and improve their future. They are also contributing through different mechanisms such as academic research, engineering design, project management, and construction of solutions, as well as in government and policy making. Through this session, we will look at some examples through the work of young engineers, as well as projects coming out of the Youth for Water and Climate platform. So in interest of time, I will jump right ahead as we go through our agenda. Firstly, we will have a feature speaker who will be Sarah Deuce. And so looking forward to hear from her. Then we would have a panel, really great panel discussion with some really amazing people. We will introduce them at that segment. Then we'll follow on with youth stories and the launch of the Youth Joint Statement and a Q&A before the closing. So now I will go on and welcome Sarah Deuce. Welcome to our session. Sarah Deuce is the Executive Director of the International Secretariat for Water. And she started at ISW SWE as an advisor on development, partnerships, and communications. She is now executive director for the movement, contributing to its advocacy work in different areas. A socio-economist by training with a solid understanding of international development, particularly in the water and sanitation sector. Her natural curiosity and desire for a challenge led her to work and study abroad. She has worked for local NGOs and for the water division of the Swiss Agency for Development Cooperation, SDC. While at SDC, she advocated for access to water and sanitation to be considered a human right and for the inclusion of a specific water goal in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So I'd like to welcome Sarah Deuce. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Rihanna, so much. Good evening or good afternoon, everybody. It's really a great pleasure to be with you for this session. Thank you so much for having me. Climate change, this is the defining issue of this century, of course, and the youth, young people are the ones who can and who have to put pressure on decision makers and act now to ensure that there is a future for humanity on this planet. And you know, climate change is actually water change. Floods, hurricanes, they affect access to water, they affect sanitation, they affect food, it creates insecurity, it impacts the economy. And around the world, we have tons of youth that have inspiring solutions and who are creating their own spaces to advocate and to secure a future. But they very, very often face a technical and financial gap to successfully implement their solutions, as they are often marginalized or excluded from funding opportunities. In my organization, the ISW, we have been empowering the new generation of water leaders and climate leaders since over 20 years, and we are finding innovative ways to support youth-led action, what is at the core of our mission. 2018 was a very important year for us, as we have joined forces with the Global Water Partnership to launch the Youth for Water and Climate platform. This platform, this platform aims to connect young people with, first of all, what they are often missing, to fulfill the gap of knowledge, so offer capacity building, and offer financial and technical support for the implementation of local action. So it's a platform actually to connect young people to financial actors and to connect those young water leaders and climate leaders to the people who have the knowledge and who can support them. It also provides seed fundings and technical support to projects related to water sharing, water and health, water and agriculture, or water-related risk. Since 2018, 600 projects have been submitted on the platform. For example, in 2020, we launched a call for projects, and we were really surprised about what we received. We received in a few weeks over 300 submissions coming from 50 different countries, demonstrating the real demand for such opportunities. We relaunched a call in 2021 where we received high quality projects that I have to say, really good project from over 70 countries. And over the last 2 years, we were happy to be able to offer financial and technical support to 18 projects from different contexts, offering different solutions, and some of them you will get to know about today. So, as mentioned, access to finance, access to technical support is essential for young people, and we have to come together across sectors, across borders, across generations to find ways and mechanisms to make this happen. This is why I am very glad to be participating in this session, which is bringing together voices of young people from the world, including youth and experts from different sectors, such as the finance sector. It is through intergenerational dialogues, such as this one, that we will co-create innovative solutions to face the biggest challenge of our century. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And I think you're definitely pointed that the accessibility to financing as well as resources is definitely one of the major things that youth need in moving forward with their projects. And it is something that, as you mentioned, the YWC platform aims to fulfill this gap. So now moving forward and to have a discussion, I will hand over to Michele to start to introduce our panel segment. Over to you, Michele.
Great, thanks, Rihanna. It is my pleasure to introduce the next segment of our event, which is the panel discussion. This discussion aims to look at how the finance and the technological sectors of the water industry can work together to reduce the barriers in enhancing climate resilience through building the capacity of youth. Our panel is going to be moderated by Alyssa Vaillancourt. Alyssa holds a bachelor's degree in business administration from HEC Montreal and a master's degree in international studies at Université de Montréal. Following her studies, she joined the Quebec government's Ministry of the Environment and the Fight Against Climate Change as a climate change advisor. She is now Youth Project Officer at the International Secretariat for Water, where she works on the development of the Youth for Water and Climate platform and the empowerment of the World Youth Parliament for Water. Alyssa is also a member of the Global Centre for Adaptation's Youth Advisory Panel to the CEO. Over to you, Alyssa.
Thank you so much, Michele, and thank you, Rihanna and Sarah, for your wonderful opening words. So it's a pleasure for me today to be animating this panel. So before we go any further, we have such an amazing panelist with us, group of panelists with us today. So I would like to let each panelist about 1 minute, if you would like to introduce yourselves and give us a little bit more background to get us started on your current work, and maybe a little bit more information as well on what you hope to achieve through today's discussion. So to start us off with their opening remarks, I would let Michele to take the mic.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm really happy to be part of this discussion. I'm Dr. Michele Ken. I don't know, youth activist in the domain of water and climate. I'm really passionate by what I'm doing. Actually, I'm coordinating a regional network on water and climate in Central Africa. And through this session, for me, I really want to contribute to bring a message. This is not my message, because I shared the orientation of this session with the other youth to say, okay, I have something to bring out. Please, what are your thoughts about this thing? I really want to come out with a general message from the youth of ours.
Thank you so much, Michele. Over to you, Caroline.
Hello, hi everyone. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really excited to be here tonight. So I'm Caroline Fouvet. I work for Willis Towers Watson. I'm part of the Climate and Resilience Hub, where I'm a climate finance analyst. And for the past 5 years, I've been working on the Green Climate Fund and helping developing countries access the Green Climate Fund, understand its requirements, helping entities to become accredited, and also working on involving the private sector in financing climate change adaptation. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion tonight and also hearing concrete examples of on-the-ground projects. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Caroline. So hopefully we'll be able to get some inspiration from all of your stories and from the videos as well, as we'll be seeing towards more of the end of the session. So now we'll leave it off to Tarika.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to wherever you are. I'm Tarika. I'm from Sri Lanka and working for National Water Supply and Drainage Board. In early stages of my career, I served in 2 World Bank projects. The first was a rural water supply project implemented in 7 districts. The second was Climate Resilient Improvement Project, where we studied about forecasted extreme events due to climate change and planned suitable mitigation measures. This was the very first project of such nature in South Asia. At present, I'm serving in an urban wastewater project funded by French Development Bank. Further, I founded an organization called Today for Tomorrow to serve in the fields of climate change and water. Our project Bindu, meaning drops, which is for supplying water for rural village, won a grant from International Secretariat of Water. By representing youth, I'm super excited for today's session to listen for the pioneers about their contributions in order to combat climate change and water in all over the world.
Thank you, Tarika. And finally, over to you, Stacey.
Hi, it's my pleasure to be here. My name is Stacey Swan, and I'm CEO of Climate Finance Advisors. And I'm really excited to hear some of the lessons and experiences of our panel. And also in particular to kind of, bring the insights from the financial sector about how water assets can be financed and made resilient. There's definitely a need to accelerate kind of climate resilience in water all over the world, and in particular for some most vulnerable countries.
Thank you very much, Stacey. So as was mentioned by Stacey, I think the whole goal of our discussion here today is to kind of identify which are the barriers that youth all over the world are currently facing. I know there's a huge protest that's happening today at COP26. Thousands of youth that are in the streets chanting and getting all the attention that they deserve to get their message across. So I think that today we have the chance of having a really amazing intergenerational panel, and hopefully we'll be able to identify what are the key barriers that youth are facing to take action, and how can we face these barriers and propose innovative mechanisms. So to start off with the discussion, I would like to hand it off to Michele. So Michele, you've been involved for many years in the field of water and climate. You have worked with the World Youth Parliament for Water, with the AMCAO Youth Group, the Water and Climate Network of Central African Youth Organizations, only to name a few. So in your opinion, in your experience, what are the main barriers for action that youth are currently facing in Africa and more generally around the world?
Okay. For what I know is that in Africa, youth are very dynamic and very active in the domain of water and climate. But actually, they are not enough training. They don't have at times the right training. Maybe we have some engineer coming from school, but how much engineer do we have when we consider what we need to do? It's not enough. And most of the youth, the youth who are working in the field who want to push the lines are the ones who discover these challenges inside youth associations like me. It was my case. I have a background in communication. So when I was like moving, I just discovered that, and it was really passionate. So we don't have opportunity at times to build our capacities. For example, we have youth with good idea in the sector, but they don't even know how to move from the idea to a concept, not all to move from to go to the project. I don't know, maybe Sarah will tell us more about that because they receive many projects. But when you just get in touch with the youth, they will tell you a very good idea, but they don't know because they don't have the support, the right support. This is why I'm really happy with this project of this platform for youth and climate. Very interesting. And also, I can talk about the fact that they don't have a real support even at the national level. Because the stakeholders, at times it's private stakeholders or NGO that support youth, but at the national level, the countries, they don't really support what they are doing. Let me take just a basic example. We have delegations from countries, from African countries, they actually in the COP. But how much young people do we have in this delegation? Let's go far. When we are preparing COP, there are local COI taking part in every country. We don't have the support of our national stakeholders in this process. How can youth have the support after this if when they are organizing small things, they don't have the support of this for the national parties? But we have and we recognize and we are grateful for the support of international organizations, but international organizations are not the one implementing things in our countries. They just help and accompany and support the countries in the way they are doing things. So this is a very big problem because they don't have the conscience of what young people can bring in the table. We like young people like observers. We are not just observers. We can bring something in the table. For the coming World Water Forum is a very good initiative that has been launched. There's an open call for youth participation in panels, like to be speakers. This is very amazing and it is unique opportunities. So this is a very big obstacle. We young people in Africa, we need to be mentored. We need to be support and to accompany so that we can also accompany the process. We don't just need to get the finance and come to the COP. This is useless. I've been traveling for years, attending forums, but at the end, when you come back to your country, you say, okay, what's next? There's nothing next, nothing next. So this is the very big problem, because if this problem is solved, the problem of training will also be touched, and all those problems. So we need to have this process of what young people can bring, not just taking it in a political way, but taking it in the youth must be part of the solution.
Thank you so much, Michele. I think there's so much to unpack in the message that you just shared. There's so much in there. I think you've covered so many really important points regarding capacity building, access to finance, being heard and considered in big international events, and as an important participating party that needs to be at the decision-making table. So I would jump from what you just said and kind of build on to that. I think that one element that you mentioned regarding access to finance, I think that's so true. We say young people need to take action. And I think there are so many people all around the world that are willing to take action, and that some are also need capacity building, but some already do have the capacities and do have that entrepreneurial spirit to put into action what they've been shouting in the streets for many years now. And one of the there's so many big international funds out there that exist. And so Caroline, on our panel today, you're our expert for these big international climate funds, such as the GCF. You work at Willis Towers Watson, and you're currently assisting countries with to access international funds such as the GCF. But as a young person, sometimes these big international funds seem so inaccessible. So in your experience and in your work that you're currently doing now, why is it so difficult for youth to access funds such as the GCF, and what could we do to help youth to make these funds more accessible for youth?
Of course, no, thank you very much for your question. And I think it's really important tonight to recognize that there's a big disconnect between the international climate finance landscape and then the people on the ground who want to receive the money and implement projects. And I think when it comes to the GCF more specifically, I would say the main hindrances I would see were first the requirements, the very stringent and specific requirements that maybe don't make sense to people who want to down the line access the Green Climate Fund. And one of the main requirements that has been a pitfall for many project developers is the climate rationale of a project, because the Green Climate Fund wants to fund climate projects and not development as usual projects, even though both have a lot of overlaps. And I think it's really important for people who submit projects to be able to demonstrate how their projects will help communities facing already climate impacts, adapt to climate change or mitigate climate change, what's happening right now, what's happening in the future with climate change, and how that can be transformed through the project. Another issue I see with the Green Climate Fund are the different actors who are involved up until you reach the fund in the end. So for example, the National Designated Authority, which is the focal point in developing countries' ministries, which will give its green light to projects. So it's not everyone who knows which one is descended and how to access it. And also other actors like the accredited entities, who are the entities who can submit the project to the fund, but that's the entities that young people and CSOs should be working with to get the funding on the ground. And then I would say a big hurdle as well is that the GCF is an international climate, a large fund that wants to fund very large projects, over $5 million usually. And on the ground, we have very small projects, small scale projects. So there's this disconnect between the small scale idea and then the large scale ideas that the GCF in the end wants to do. And I think what can be done, I think it goes both ways. I think there's capacity building for young people and for organizations. And I think platforms like the water and climate platform that was mentioned is a good step. There's capacity building that's provided from the GCF directly through the readiness program that aims to explain the requirements of the GCF directly to people in countries, to many different organizations. And I think it can be done the other way around as well. I think young people should also help themselves. And by that, I mean, stop working in silos, because there are tons of very great tiny ideas, but if they want to make impact in the long term, they have to join forces and then to demonstrate how they can scale up things that already work on the ground. Because I think young people know their countries really well, they know the context really well, and they just need to work together. And I also think they need to engage with this ecosystem of factors that I just mentioned, like the accredited entities that have direct access to the fund, and then see with them how they could execute projects. So yeah, I'll stop here, but
Oops, I'm so sorry. I wanted to unmute myself and I ended up muting.
No worries, I was just stopping.
Thank you so much, Caroline. I really like what you said about we need to stop working in silos. I think that in the climate movement, I feel like we've seen more of a united movement regarding climate, but I think especially in the water sector, I feel like there are so many youth movements that are out there that are currently working in parallel. And I think that's going to be one big thing that we're really going to have to work on, and we've already started working on for the World Water Forum, is really creating a united voice for the youth to be able to scale up our impact and to make sure that we're heard as we must on the international scene. So thank you for that. So we talked a little bit about the big international climate funds, such as the GCF, but there are so many more. There's a bunch of other actors that are also involved in the financing, such as the private sector. So I would like to hand it over now to Stacey. So Stacey, you have a long list of so many different kinds of experiences. You're currently the CEO and founding partner of Climate Finance Advisors. You also work as a professor. You've been working as a professor as well for many years now. So can you tell us a little bit more about how you perceive the role of the private sector, and how can the private sector better support early stage investing for innovation brought forward by young people?
Yeah, thanks. Actually, I'm going to start with two other things that Caroline just said, because I think it's important. I loved that comment about silos, so I'll get to that in a second. But you asked her a question about why the GCF is so hard for youth. And I want to just say, kind of in this forum, and for the youth that might listen to this, the GCF is hard for everybody. It's not the youth, it's the GCF, which is very hard for everyone to access. It doesn't matter kind of how much experience you have. It's quite a bureaucratic system, which is almost a lesson for the world, right? We really do need our systems, processes, policies to be more efficient, faster, enable us to have action faster, because we're running out of time. So that's something that, any of those youth out there and youth working in water who want to access the GCF, we definitely need you, and we definitely need you to engage, and we definitely need you to engage not just on the projects, but also in helping them make that fund more efficient and more accessible. The question or the comment about stopping working in silos, I think, was perfect. A great segue to one of the things that I think is really important for people to remember or recognize, which is that we need everybody in all sectors, in all disciplines, in all walks of life working on the climate agenda. There's no job of the future that doesn't include climate change. That includes accountants and lawyers and doctors and, yes, bankers and private equity people and development professionals and engineers and activists. So, we also need to kind of not, as in an effort to not work in silos, also not kind of, or also recognize that all of those people are needed, and all of those people need the capacity to think about what they do in their job and in their career and how they work on, things that make them happy in life through the climate lens, because that's going to be absolutely necessary. As I teach, I have been teaching for about 8 years now. I teach in the business school at American University in Washington. I used to teach at Johns Hopkins. And I can't tell you how popular sustainability and climate change is for business students today. And 20 years ago, 30 years ago, that was not the case. I mean, you went to business school and you got a degree in finance, but you didn't really think about how that affected the world. There's a sea change coming because the youth are changing the world already. So I think that's really important to kind of recognize. And then finally, I would say, remember that there's people coming up behind you too. So I feel young, but I'm not as young as you guys, and you guys are young, but there's youth behind you. And while we're trying to kind of build the capacity of the youth, and the youth will be the kind of, managers of the future, you're in the best position to build climate capacity across kind of all sectors and disciplines. Those of us who've been working on climate change for a long time are few and far between at our age and with our experience. So we need to kind of multiply ourselves down the generations, and you guys are very well positioned to do that.
Thank you, Stacey. So now I think we need to see how we can do things better. So we've talked about what are the problems with the things that currently exist and the barriers that are currently faced. But now I want us all to try and envision what can we do better, and how can we propose innovative mechanisms that are going to allow youth to face these barriers, to have access to more capacity building, and to have the capacity to implement these projects. And also, how can we propose innovative mechanisms, financing mechanisms, to allow the youth to have access to this important financial support that is essential to implement activities and to take action. I know the finance is out there. I know all the knowledge is out there. I think it's just a means of getting it how to get it to the people on the ground. So one mechanism, I'm sure that together we can brainstorm on so many ideas, but one mechanism that we're currently working on is the Youth for Water and Climate platform that's been mentioned a few times already since the beginning of the session, that aims to propose an innovative way of getting the funds to the youth on the ground. So not only giving them financial support, but also accompanying it with technical support and a one-on-one really guidance to help them through every step of the way, that everything that comes with getting access to these funds. So Tarika is one of our youth that has been selected amongst the hundreds of youth that have submitted a project, as Sarah mentioned earlier. So Tarika, could you talk to us a little bit more about how has your experience been with the Youth for Water and Climate platform? How has this platform been different? For example, I know you've also had experiences with the AFD, you've had experiences with other bigger organizations. So how has this experience with YWC differed, and what has it given to you? Off to you.
Thank you very much for that question, Elsa. I will start my answer with the discussion popped up by Okla. She mentioned that the youth should play a vital role, not at the bottom, but at the middle. I would like to add, yes, of course, youth should play a vital role, but not at the middle, not at the end, but at the top. Let me start the answer for your question. Of course, I highly believe from the way that they call the projects, like it was interesting, and I was enthusiastic and empowered to be part of it. The title says, Global Youth Take Action for Water and Climate Change. And out of 211 projects, 10 finalists were selected from 3 main continents, considered as vulnerable for safe access to water and sanitation, and Center for Climate Change. They are Asian, South African, and Latin American. Further, they have clearly mentioned the selection criteria also at the beginning. That was very interesting. I really like that. That they would consider about teamwork, partnerships, collaborations, achievable number of sustainable development goals, and time period. Women, just like you and I in the panel, are the center for combating climate change and water-related issues. Importantly, they have mentioned about the significant role of women leading these projects. Even this panel discussion is having 5 women leaders. Most of these projects which were selected for funding are led by women. When talking about the support given by ISW and their leadership, we had several capacity building programs, networking sessions with fellow water leaders. Bindu Drops is a project which I am working on, has several components, and biggest component of it is to get them connected for safe access for water. And even within a month from commencement, I'm proudly says, in the new normal, we were able to achieve that target. 2 more exciting months on project execution and lifelong experience with YWC is about to start. That's what I have to say about the contribution with respect to YWC.
Thank you so much, Tarika. So we have about 4 minutes left to conclude the panel discussion. So I would like to let each one of you on to give us a final message. So if you have one final message that you would like to tell everyone that has joined us today, so a message for the youth, but as well a message for the senior experts, that because I think that this problem needs to be addressed by everyone. We've talked about not working in silos, about having a discussion and working together. So if you have one message for the youth that are listening and one message for the experts that are listening, not saying that experts can't be youth, but just maybe older generations that are listening to us and that are asking themselves, how can I act and how can I support? So maybe I would leave it off to Caroline to start us off.
Thank you, Lisa. No, what I would like to say to youth is that I think they should think, they should have more confidence about what they do. And I think they have the energy, I think they have the will, they have the innovative spirit, and also the entrepreneurship skills to really push forward their projects and go towards their end goals. And I think it's just a matter of connecting the dots and getting the experts to talk to relevant organizations and to get everyone, going from the bottom to the top and accessing, in terms, when I speak about climate finance, the International Climate Fund. So yes, I think it's a communications exercise. And I think with all the momentum we've seen at COP26 and we're still seeing, I think we're on the right track.
Thank you so much, Caroline. So I will leave it off to Tarika now.
I believe COP26 is the correct platform for the world leaders to think about the ocean-centric water and climate change solutions for the upcoming decade. UN has declared this upcoming decade as the oceans, for the year of the decade for oceans. So it's the correct time for the youth to work, not regionally, not nationally, but globally together to combat climate change and water. As a globe, we faced for a pandemic. So it's the time for all of us to get together and work further in order to combat climate change, because climate change is real, and IPCC have declared human as the most vulnerable creatures for the climate change.
Thank you, Tarika. Stacey?
So for the youth, I think, first of all, try many different roles and many different things. I think it's not, it has been my experience anyway, and I'm a little older than, I like to think I'm youthful, but I'm a little older than the youth stakeholder, but it takes a while to figure out what you're good at. And there's a lot of things that you can do to try and solve the climate crisis, even in the water sector alone. So finance is one, engineering is one, entrepreneurship is one, there's a lot of different things that everything needs to kind of have some climate angle to it. And, find out what you're good at and focus your efforts there. That's the first thing. I would say keep pushing, because without the youth kind of pushing, the older generations may not kind of move as fast as we really need to for the climate crisis. And for the older generation, I think, or the experts, for lack of a better word, I think plenty of us recognize that without the youth, there's no way to address the climate challenge. We need to build those legions of people who will come up behind us and change the world into a climate-aligned, positive world. But I pledge that I will continue to spread that message among my peers. But for those among the older generations, for sure, remember that the youth is what we need to kind of leave behind and build the capacity with.
Thank you, Stacey. We need more allies such as yourself and Caroline. So it's really a great pleasure to be able to count on support of people like you that consider youth as a really important stakeholder. And to conclude this panel, I will leave it off to Michele.
Yeah. For me, I want to tell the youth that they should try to work closely with the stakeholders. It's good because at times it's really more easier to influence or to impact when you are impacted by this side. When they just say okay, the other side is the stakeholder, let's work out things. They just need to try to build links with the major stakeholder. For example, my network is working closely with JWP. We are a member of the steering committee. And in each country, we are working with the national country partnership. So it links us with very, very large number of water and climate organization or the private company. So it's very important for that. And also to tell them to try also to work together, create this kind of synergy, because when they are working together, they are more strong also. And what the advocacy will be more also easy to understand. If they know that Michele alone will come and say, oh, no, for this, but if they know that behind Michele or there's a very big structure. There are many youth working together. I think we will be able to push the line. Thank you.
Thank you, Michele. So we're stronger together. I think I couldn't have finished on a better word. So thank you so much to all of our panelists. Hopefully you'll be able to stay with us for the Q&A that will come in just a few minutes. But before then, I will hand it back over to Rihanna.
Thank you, Lisa. And now, as Lisa said, that we're gonna wait a few minutes before we jump into the Q&A. So thank you for the awesome discussion, and I think it was quite inspiring. Especially I learned a lot on the finance aspect of it, and the different areas that youth could probably tap into. But now we're gonna go into the introduction of the Climate Declaration, a joint statement from the International Youth Organization. This is an unprecedented statement that has been put together to get the attention of UN member nations. So I would like to introduce you to Milda Pladet, I hope I pronounced that right, and Kirill Holstovs. I'm so sorry if I butchered that. Milda graduated from the University of Southampton with the M.Eng degree in civil engineering and worked on construction and infrastructure projects. She completed the traineeship at the European Commission Unit of Engineering, Marine and Rail Industries. She was elected to the Commission Trainees Committee and was Vice President of the Public Policy at European Young Engineers NGO. Milda represents the Institution of Civil Engineers at the World Federation of Engineering Organizations, Young Engineers Future Leaders Committee, and is a member of the WFEO Action Group on COP26, where she set up a working group on SDG 13, which aims to work and contribute to sustainable development of countries by promoting and sharing of information and collaboration between WFEO young engineers. She initiated cooperation with UN, UNESCO, and World Bank youth networks on SDG 13 in preparation for COP26. Milda is a Woman in Transport member, Fairness, Inclusion, Respect Scheme Ambassador. And now to Kirill Ostov, I'm so sorry, is a high-achieving early civil engineer working at AECOM Bridges team in Newcastle upon Tyne, UK. He's a climate and sustainable development action advocate who strives to lead by example and takes personal responsibility in generating, organizing, implementing, and supporting sustainable initiatives. He has been shortlisted for the NCE Graduate of the Year and Newcastle University Rising Star Awards for 2021, and he takes pride in volunteering his time to climate policy initiatives, building on his role as a UN Youth for Climate pre-COP26 delegate representing Latvia. He's a co-initiator of the joint statement of influential international youth organization that provides the overarching climate policy recommendations to COP26. So there's a lot more here, but I think in the moment for time, I will hand it over to you both to take us and launch the joint statement. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Rihanna. It is a pleasure to launch this, especially at our event. And I will speak about three things. So first of all, how we initiated this statement, about our current work at COP, and also our future plans. So climate emergency is here, and this is why all the stakeholders are very critical to be deployed in this work. And scientists and engineers have a very important and critical role. However, the global capacity of young engineers was not fully deployed yet. But the World Federation of Engineering Organizations, representing more than 30 million of engineers, having representation of more than 100 national members countries, gives an excellent platform to reach out and connect the global community of young engineers. However, to add tangible value to UN SDG 14 targets, it was obvious that we need to initiate and cooperate very closely with UN youth networks. So this is why we initiated a cooperation with YOUNGO, with GYCN, which is Young Professionals at World Bank Group Network for Climate Action, with Major Group for Children in Youth Science and Policy, platform interface, UN Secretary General Youth Advisors on Climate Action. And our main outcome of this cooperation is the joint statement, where we give 12 policy objectives and we show the unified voice of our youth networks, which is the first declaration of such a scope. Our current work at COP is that we actively and proactively engaging with COP parties, arranging the meetings with them, and with those parties who have the same policy objectives and goals as we do, we seek and discuss how we could support to achieve the necessary outcomes out of COP26 negotiations. And to conclude, it is honor that this happened, and the most challenging part was to set up a cooperation between such a diverse network, such as young engineers, young professionals in finance and World Bank Group, and the key networks within United Nations. So I believe that this will continue and will continue very strongly and effectively in the future as well. And now I'm handing over to Kirill, who supported this statement to give more information and background information about the policy's objectives. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Milde. Yes, you mentioned the statement is truly unprecedented, and it's an honor to be at COP26 and actually talk to all these policymakers and heads of delegations about our statement, and actually we have already received some very good feedback from them. So the joint statement really showcases the unity of the global young engineering community and international youth organizations in a need to limit the global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius, and importantly, ensure protection of public health, livelihoods, and infrastructure through climate adaptation and resilience action. So the statement contains 12 overarching policy recommendations for COP26, which cover the areas of climate mitigation, adaptation, resilience, and inclusive action, which ensures empowerment of youth, their capacity building, and meaningful inclusion in policymaking. So first of all, we need to deliver decarbonization as rapidly as possible. And we also need to remember that a difference in fractions of degrees really could threaten the very existence of some nations and species and have great consequences for human and animal suffering. And that's why we're calling the COP26 parties not only to commit to halving the emissions by 2030 compared to 2010 levels and reaching net zero by 2050, but also actually ensuring a clear and transparent route map for every sector of the economy. And the signatories of the statement consider it vital that the COP26 parties reach an agreement on a roadmap to stop exploration and development of new fossil fuel projects on a timescale that's compatible with the 1.5 degree pathway. And we also need to do this not only in a rapid manner, but also in a just manner, and do not leave anyone behind. And of course, we want to highlight that climate change has already progressed, and we're seeing increasing risks and consequences from its adverse effects that create real damage today. And therefore, we call the parties to prepare national adaptation plans and start their implementation as soon as possible, and no later than 2024, with meaningful and inclusive participation of local communities as well as youth. And adaptation plans need to put integrated water resources management at the center of their strategy as well, because success in mitigation actions, as well as building resilience and achieving sustainable development goals really depends on access to reliable water resources. And so overall, we want to ensure protection of public health and livelihoods, and with a particular focus on vulnerable groups, including children, youth, women, indigenous people, the elderly, and people with pre-existing conditions, and groups in the most affected geographical locations, as well as low-income groups. and we strongly encourage international cooperation on that matter, so that developed countries contribute to the protection of developing countries, communities of which often have actually done the least to cause those dangerous effects of climate change, but will suffer the most from them. And backed by the global engineering community, we also want to stress the importance of introducing built environment regulations that align infrastructure projects with 1.5-degree climate targets and provide effective protection to the infrastructure users. And we want the regulations to ensure no net biodiversity and appropriate consideration of nature-based solutions in climate mitigation and adaptation efforts. A particular challenge that needs to be addressed is retrofitting of existing assets and prioritizing energy efficiency and fossil fuel phase out, as well as allocation of costs in a fair way. So from our panelists today, we have heard some great examples of how youth can contribute to adaptation and resilience. And we think that in order to fully utilize their potential and their ambition and determination to create a sustainable future, we do need to invest in them and provide meaningful opportunities for their involvement in decision-making and creation of the necessary change. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. So we're gonna jump into a short Q&A period. So if you have any questions, so anyone that you would like to ask, it could be to our panelists, but it could also be to Krills and Milda regarding the joint statement that they've just presented. So we're open to taking all the questions. So to kick us off, we have a first question that was asked by Laurie. So she would like, this direction is directed to you. The question is directed to you, Tarika. So now that you have had a chance with the funding from the YWC platform, how do you think this can help to get more funding and scale up your project? What are the challenges for after when the funding will end?
That's actually a good question, Lord. When we were establishing the project, when we were working with the project, we always think about the sustainable solutions that we can give. So when we are giving the answers, we always tried to get them connected with the respective national or the regional organization in that area. So for that, as I have been worked with National Water Supply and Drainage Board and working with National Water Supply and Drainage Board helped me a lot. So I believe apart from after giving them access to the safe water, and it will be continuing, we'll be able to help them to manage that sustainably. And apart from that, I would like to emphasize there are several other funding opportunities that they have been called upon, having different areas. So we will be able to focus on those areas in the future of giving them much more, like making their village itself a sustainable one.
Thank you, Tarika. And we have Patricio that's also just mentioned in an earlier session, there was a point brought up about unsustainable financing for youth projects. I actually just assisted to that, took part in that session as well. And I heard that comment and also, I also noticed it. So meaning small seed funding that covers a short space of time. How can we improve the impact of the short-term funding to have more long-term financial independence? I thought that was a really good comment from the person that said this, that she's saying, I'm a pro at getting $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 grants. I can do that. That's something that I'm skilled at, but I'm not good at getting sustainable finance for my project as a young person. So how can we change this, and how can we become more better at getting long-term financial independence for youth? So I think that's a great question. Thank you, Patricio. So maybe either Caroline or Stacey, would this be a question that you would like to try and answer?
I'm happy to give part of the answer, or just start to think about this question. I think that comes back to what we were saying, that young organizations shouldn't individually submit small-scale projects. They should, gather and submit projects that that ask for a larger budget and that have a strong exit strategy. So starting to think about what happens when, when the funding stops. And that's where I think it's really important to engage with the private sector and to have the private sector involved from the project from day one. And also I think, even though it might be difficult at first to approach the private sector, I think they're becoming more and more aware of physical climate risks and what that means. So I think it's easier to have them on board and that awareness is increasing in that sense. Stacey, I don't know if you want to also comment.
Yeah, I think I would echo what Caroline said, and then I would also just say, if you're an entrepreneur and you're a youth entrepreneur, and you're looking to raise money either from climate funds, sustainability funds, or elsewhere, make sure you've thought about all of the different skill sets you need to have in the organization to make the project a success, and then the funding request a success. Sometimes it's it's not the case that you have a good idea, but you need different types of skill sets to execute. I like to think of it like a play. There's a director of a play. That's usually the entrepreneur, but then you have different people and skill sets that play an important role, whether it's in project management, whether it's in stakeholder engagement, whether it's in certainly accessing climate funds. You probably need somebody who's got those skill sets, which are not, they're not things that you can take your engineers and necessarily point them to, because it's not an efficient use of your engineering skill sets. So think of like the different roles and capacities you need in order to be successful in raising your funds.
Thank you. So we have another question. So for Michele, you mentioned that it's more difficult to gain national support as compared to international support. So why do you think this is so, and how do you recommend to overcome this challenge? I think you're muted, Michele.
Okay, the international organizations are really working to meet the SDGs, and they are doing everything they can so that we can reach to that goal. I'm not saying that the countries doesn't work to attend these SDGs, but we need to know that in countries we have other realities. For example, we have the terrorism, we have some war, we have conflict. So at times in the countries, they don't put things as some kind of things like a priority. This is a fact. So we have this political aspect that is always above all the other considerations. So that's one of the reasons why at times it's very hard to get to mobilize finance, for example. So, but the thing is that what I've discovered with JWP is they are already working with state, with the government. So we need to know how to get inside this relation and be part of like the meetings, to be part of the process they have together. So it is because we are going inside this process, we will become more credible. They will be more confident about what we can do. They say, hey, if UNESCO is believing in trusting this voice or this organization, maybe we can be also confident with what they can bring us on the table. So it's something that we need to build. We need to build on. It's not something that will be very spontaneous tomorrow. We need to build this relation so that we can reach to a level where we can have finally a system, or maybe at the parliament, as we are working for the right of women, we can also write for the right of young people, to say that, okay, at the parliament, we also have seats for young people. So it's a process that we need to build. It's not impossible, but it's difficult actually. And at time when you go to the country, they'll say, oh, we don't have, maybe we'll put you in touch with an international organization, because we don't have those facilities here. Here, the budget is very limited, or so this kind of reason. So I'm not saying that it's impossible, but if we try to get inside the system, understand, and try to link It's very difficult, but I'm doing it and it works.
I think we can all be inspired by the work that you're doing, Michele. Thank you for sharing. I maybe have one follow-up question on that. I think that what you've just mentioned echoes with something Stacey mentioned to you when we were just discussing before this session, that she mentioned to change the systems, youth need to be from the inside as well. So we need youth from the outside pushing and putting pressure, but we also need youth inside to kind of change the systems and the way that finance works. So I know, Stacey, you have to leave shortly. So maybe just if you want to say a few words on that before you leave.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, it's very important. Again, you know, I think of this problem as a problem that requires everybody, inside systems, inside organizations, outside organizations. And up until now, up until very recently, this really was a kind of a sector or a segment that was really incremental and marginal, and, you know, whether it was infrastructure, or whether it was sustainability or even finance. But today we need people everywhere, in all seats around the table, in all types of organizations. And I think to the extent that that's true, we also need to lift each other up in all types of organizations. So definitely kind of building networks, building different types of networks, and building the capacity of youth to be able to take climate change into any and every job that they go into. Yes, and I do have to leave. I apologize, I need to leave early, but this is such a kind of inspirational topic. So thank you all so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Stacey, for joining. So we have one question from Tom that asks, skills, financing, and opportunities for climate action seem to be unequally distributed across the globe. How can we best move out of our silos and collaborate effectively across borders? So maybe I would direct this question to Caroline, because Caroline, you had mentioned previously in your opening remarks that we need to stop working in silos. I think this echoes what you mentioned in your speech. So do you want to take this one?
Sure. No, thank you. Thank you, Tom, for this question. I think it's a really good point about, you know, what's happening in different countries and what are different experiences. And what we have been doing in many projects are to create international dialogues about best practices and what has worked in some countries. And I think if we could manage to institutionalize this kind of international dialogue through platforms like, once again, the Water and Climate platform that you were mentioning earlier, I think that could be really useful. So people like Tarika, for example, have access to funding and know concretely how the application process goes and what were the hurdles and what worked well. These are very interesting dialogues that could happen on a regular basis and that people could go to and benefit from. Because I think the skills, the financing, the opportunities, everything is already out there. You know, there's nothing new to invent. So it's just a matter of getting connected and getting to work together, learning from other actors and involving the relevant people at the right time.
I definitely agree with that. Thank you, Caroline. I have maybe one last question for the Q&A. If ever anyone else in the audience has questions, we still have a few minutes. You can drop them in the chat. But one question that I would have for you, I'm not sure who would like to take this one. So whoever wants to take it. But I know that, so there's a lot of, well, not enough, we all agree with that, but there is a certain amount of financing that's dedicated to climate. But within the money that's dedicated to climate, there's such a small percentage, I'm not exactly sure what this percentage is, but I know it is very, very small that's dedicated to water. And this to me seems to be, this percentage should be so much bigger, considering that water and climate are so closely linked, considering that climate is most felt through water disasters, considering that water is such a key element to build climate resilience. So why is there such a small percentage of climate financing that's dedicated to water? So I don't know if you guys have your views or opinions on this such small percentage that dedicated to water. Maybe how can we better leverage this link between climate and water to enhance the level of finance that's dedicated to water? This is an open question, so if ever anyone wants to take it.
I'm happy to kick off the conversation, but no, what you're saying, Lise, is really interesting. And I think it relates to the adaptation financing challenge that we're facing in general, because as we know, international climate finance goes mostly towards mitigation. And why? It's because with mitigation, you can measure the benefits very concretely, whereas for adaptation, it's very dependent on the location, on the beneficiaries. So I think that might be one of the reasons why so little finance is allocated to water. Then how do we find a solution? I think we could spend another hour brainstorming together tonight. I think maybe once again, it's how do you make the business case for investing in water, and maybe how do you bring the private sector that works across the water sector, and how can you show that if there's grant funding or cross-national funding that goes into it, then there's a sustainable exit strategy, and then these businesses around water can become sustainable and don't rely on international finance.
Yes, Tarika, go ahead. Oh, you're muted. No, we can't. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. I would like to add for some points for the question that you raised, together with my experience and from the things that I feel. If you are working, like as you correctly mentioned, the role of water when it comes to the climate change has not been like properly and clearly mentioned. Even at the Paris Agreement, water has not been much spoken. But we should remember all the sustainable development goals are around water. I would like to add something for the question that you popped up. When it comes for the climate change issues and for the water supply issues and the access for the safe water and sanitation, for the countries like us, the developing countries are struggling for the safe water access and the sanitation, and climate change comes next to that. So when it comes for the fundings that I have experienced from the World Bank and from the French Development Bank, I should say, I mean, like in one of the projects which I have worked in, rural water project, it was funded for rural water supply, and they have a set of components that when it comes for the fundings. So it was about establishing water supply and giving access to safe sanitation and organizational reformation, and as well as enhancing water and hygiene soil education. And when it comes for the French Development Bank, they are much more human-centric, where they consider about human grievances, especially on resettlement issues, where it is a good lesson for the governments and regional leaders to consider about the social and ethnic conflicts when it comes with respect to the water. When it comes for the World Bank fund that they gave for Sri Lanka for the CRIP project, World Bank is much more considered about research component of river basins and enhancing mitigation measures for the rivers, and with higher amount of available data. So in my general view on multilateral funding, when it comes with respect to developing countries for their funding requirements, so multilateral funding is what we needed compared with bilateral and the commercial funding. I mean, like they allow a greater grace period and very low interest. And like as most of these such projects, like they do not generate any recovery or the capital funds. However, I request like to adopt stringent procurement methods to ensure the quality of the final product. Although this involves a lengthy process, I should say it's worth it. So I would like to add, we couldn't work. I mean, like as I'm from a developing country, we cannot combat only with climate change. We have to go parallel with the climate change and with the sustainable development goals to have.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, Tarika. Thank you so much, Tarika. I want to thank, so that's the end of our Q&A session. I want to thank all of our panelists so much for stepping in today. It's been a pleasure to be on to animate this all-female panel. It's been a pleasure. So for the last part of our session, I will hand it back over to Michele.
Great, thanks, Elisa. What a great panel discussion. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you the next final session, which we're going to showcase 4 projects from different areas around the world where young people are working towards water resilience. So the first project is from Benin, where the Youth Network for the Green Economy are protecting and preserving the local river. I'd like to present to you Project Keep Ngati Clean.
Je suis Adrien Réviefort, environnementaliste et président du réseau des jeunes pour l'économie verte. Nous sommes basés à Ngati Tengu, dans la Takora, au Bénin. De 2018 à 2020, nous avons mis en œuvre 2 projets majeurs, le projet Keep Ngati Clean et le projet Ton futur, ton climat, à travers l'accompagnement de la plateforme Jeunesse pour l'eau et le climat et le Secretariat international de l'eau. À travers le projet Keep Ngati Clean, nous avons mis en place 4 pôles d'assainissement scolaire, un cadre de concertation des associations de jeunes pour des éco-footings, un mouvement sportif à caractère environnemental qui nous permet de nettoyer les berges de la rivière Fourien-Kéré. Nous avons aussi formé les jeunes et les scolaires sur les emballages biodégradables pour lutter contre l'utilisation des sachets plastiques. À travers le projet Ton futur, ton climat, nous avons contribué à la restauration de la tête du bassin de la Mékrou. C'est une ressource partagée entre le Bénin, le Niger et le Burkina Faso. Nous avons travaillé sur le volet vulgarisation des foyers améliorés, où nous avons diffusé plus de 171 foyers améliorés dans les ménages et plus de 25 foyers pour les femmes transformatrices des produits agricoles. La mise en œuvre de ce projet a été avec l'implication des autorités locales, mais aussi avec des jeunes leaders qui ont travaillé en synergie d'action avec nous pour les sensibilisations, pour préparer les ménages et pour vulgariser ces différents types de foyers. C'est un foyer amélioré qui permet de réduire la consommation du bois et donc de protéger les ressources naturelles de Yakabissi et de la commune de Kouandé. Si ces 2 projets n'avaient pas été mis en œuvre, nous constaterons une pression plus accrue sur les ressources en eau. Nous constaterons une saignée plus évoluée des forêts qui sont autour de la tête du bassin de la Mékrou et une pollution plus importante de la rivière Fourien-Kéré à Ngati Tengu. Nous constaterons aussi que les femmes qui utilisent les foyers traditionnels qui sont peu écologiques souffriraient plus de maladies pulmonaires, ce qui impacte la santé publique, leur santé et la santé de leur ménage. Quelques défis ont été relevés pendant la mise en œuvre de ces projets. Un premier défi, c'est l'implication des autorités locales. Nous avons alors fait des démarches envers ces autorités-là et ces démarches ont abouti et ont permis qu'elles nous accompagnent dans la mise en œuvre des activités de sensibilisation des jeunes et des femmes. Le deuxième défi, c'était par rapport au financement. Nous avons eu un premier financement de la plateforme Youth for Water and Climate qui a été complété pour nous permettre de faire une deuxième phase. Nous avons aussi eu la crise de la Covid qui a ralenti la mise en œuvre de certaines activités. Mais avec l'adaptation, nous avons pu surmonter tous ces défis. Au regard des résultats obtenus et des nombreuses demandes en termes de foyers améliorés, de l'appréciation des autorités locales pour les éco-footings que nous avons organisés, il serait intéressant et très important de trouver des moyens additionnels pour pérenniser les acquis, d'impacter vraiment la communauté et de permettre de diffuser des technologies qui aident les femmes dans la gestion durable des écosystèmes. Nous disons merci à tous les partenaires qui nous ont aidés et spécialement au Secretariat international de l'eau à travers la plateforme Jeunesse pour l'eau et le climat. Merci.
Great, so the next project that we're going to look at is by a PhD candidate in civil engineer, Jessica Taylor from Iowa State University in the United States of America. She is researching the climate change adaptation of infrastructure in rural Alaska Native communities.
Hi everyone, my name is Jessica Taylor. I'm a PhD student out of Iowa State University, getting my PhD in civil engineering with a focus on climate change adaptation projects. So today I'm going to be sharing a little bit about the projects I work on in rural Alaska, looking at community-wide adaptation of infrastructure in Alaska Native communities. So there's been accelerated erosion, flooding, and permafrost thaw that affects many Alaska Native communities, and it affects them to the scale that entire communities are having to either protect in place by putting in some sort of seawall or barrier, partially relocate or completely relocate their communities. And because of the scale of adaptation that's needed, many different external entities and stakeholders are involved in the adaptation process. So the first project I want to share with you is focused on understanding barriers to community adaptation based off of the perspectives of external stakeholders. So external stakeholders include state and federal government agencies, tribal entities, engineering firms, and nonprofits. And all of these organizations play a very influential role in determining whether these adaptation processes are successful or not. They're typically involved in risk assessments to understand climate change vulnerability of these different communities, involved in providing technical and financial resources, and also involved in the actual implementation of, say, partial relocation with development of new community infrastructure. A major focus of a lot of these community scale adaptation projects is the centralized water and wastewater systems, which are heavily impacted by storm surges and erosion and flooding. If communities have centralized water and wastewater systems, and the piping is typically quite old, and it's not easy to relocate a water system, right? So that's one of the major barriers that communities face when working with external stakeholders is how do we actually enact community-wide adaptation, and how do we design for the future, especially with water and wastewater systems, to be adaptable as these impacts continue to increase. Some of the barriers that we identified by working with external stakeholders is the issue of piecemealed funding, and that funding has to come from many different sources and is not typically designed for adaptation projects. It's typically designed for dealing with post-disaster work or community development, but the conditions on the funding is not made for adaptation, which typically has an extended timeline and is at a different scale. So that's just one example of many barriers that we identified. And the second project that I've worked on is in partnership with one Alaska Native community in the Bering Straits region that's facing increased flooding, erosion, and permafrost thaw, and that is currently working through some of these processes and these barriers to go ahead and enact community-wide adaptation by partially relocating their community. We just want to emphasize that overall the focus of this work is to support community-based adaptation, to identify these barriers, and provide policy suggestions to address many of these barriers. And thank you guys for your time, and hope you enjoy the rest of the videos.
Awesome. So our next project is the Mother Earth project by Corporación Facilitar based in Colombia. Through ecological restoration such as reforestation along the stream, the project contributes to climate change adaptation of the community's agricultural, social, and economic lifelines.
Somos un grupo de lideresas, mujeres jóvenes aborígenes que protegen sus fuentes hídricas mediante el proyecto Madre Tierra. Desde nuestra hermosa Colombia, con nuestras manos llenas de amor, expectativa e ilusión por contribuir con un granito de arena por el agua y el clima mediante la reforestación en el municipio de Necoclí, Antioquia, Comunidad Caribia. Nuestro objetivo es gestionar de manera sostenible los recursos hídricos y la adaptación al cambio climático, mejorando las capacidades de las jóvenes lideresas de esta comunidad como actoras del cambio en el sector del agua y el clima, contribuyendo a la salud de la comunidad. Todos los días es un desafío para nosotras, como por ejemplo llegar a nuestro sitio de siembra. Pero cuando lo hacemos, sabemos que estamos generando vida, contribuyendo a preservar la flora, la fauna y a cuidar nuestra fuente de agua. Se convierte en nuestro aliciente y nos anima a seguir con tan gratificante labor.
Mi nombre es Lina Yanet Peñata Flores. Y el papel que desempeño en el proyecto es líder. En este proyecto participamos 20 mujeres jóvenes del corregimiento con muchas ganas de emprender y tener nuevos conocimientos. Lo que esperamos con este proyecto es que cada una de las participantes tenga un conocimiento acerca de la reforestación y que al final del proyecto pues todo salga bien y podamos contribuir al clima y al agua. Beneficio del conocimiento, ya que por las capacitaciones y los talleres he logrado adquirir una conciencia ambiental.
Gracias, Juventud por el Agua y el Clima. Los llevamos en nuestro corazón.
Awesome. So our final project showcases young engineers contributing to flooding and coastal resilience in Hong Kong. This project is brought by AECOM and the Hong Kong Civil Engineering and Development Department, who have been working on nature-based solutions for the Tung Chung East waterfront.
To increase land supply for new developments, reclamation is commonly used in Hong Kong. The reclaimed land are normally protected by a typical seawall against storm surge and rising sea levels. They are relatively low cost and effective. However, they do not provide habitat for marine ecology. Tung Chung East Development is a new development area close to the Hong Kong International Airport. For this project, 130 hectares of land will be formed. We will construct about 5 kilometers of seawalls with equal shoreline that will provide resilience to coastal flooding and also improve the ecological value.
Although Hong Kong is a small and highly developed city, it still has a surprisingly diverse ecology. To enhance the seawall performance, we have made reference to the natural coastline found in the Tung Chung area. These include mangroves, which are found in more sheltered estuarine coastal areas. Mangroves are highly productive ecosystems that support diverse communities of crabs, snails, fish, and birds. They also provide other ecosystem services, such as water quality enhancement, supporting local fisheries, shoreline protection, and carbon sequestration. We also make reference to rocky shorelines, which are found in more exposed locations that have higher wave action. Rocky shorelines support completely different ecological communities to mangrove habitats. One especially important feature of natural shorelines are rock pools that form naturally as the tide retreats. These provide refuges for all kinds of marine flora and fauna during low tide. So, using these two basic habitat types as a reference, we worked with our landscape architects and engineers to develop the eco-shoreline design. These include mangrove eco-shoreline that were designed to hold fine sediments that will support mangrove plants, as well as rocky eco-shoreline designed to mimic more exposed shorelines. These were designed to include rock pools that are an important component of the natural habitat.
As you all know, coastal resilience is relatively new in Hong Kong, and this eco-shoreline approach is new to us as well. So, we first test the design at a site close to the project site, which you can see around us here. For the rocky eco-shoreline, we involved casting and installation of the bio blocks. This procedure was not easy, as quite a lot of precision was needed to place the block from a floating barge with the help from the divers. For mangrove eco-shoreline, we ship in sediments and plant the young trees. This side trial has allowed us to iron out some design issues, such as making sure the pools in the rocky eco-shoreline are watertight and retain water, and which types of mangrove are suitable for planting in the project site. Of course, it helped checking the resilience of the design, that means whether it can withstand the large waves that occur during typhoons. This trial site has been established for over a year and survived under numbers of typhoons.
The trial also allowed us to assess the ecological performance of the design. We found that some of the mangrove species used in the trial performed better than others, and this informed the final design. The monitoring work has also recorded more than 40 species from both the mangrove and the rocky eco-shoreline, which is more than double that record from the standard engineered shoreline.
Given the increasing risks of flooding and erosion resulting from climate change, we hoped the eco-shoreline project has shown how nature-based solutions can help providing climate resilience.
Wow, that was very inspiring, and it's really encouraging to watch young people from all different aspects of the water sector contributing to water resilience. We'd also like to thank all the organisations, young leaders and supporters who made all of those projects that you just watched happen. In particular, the Youth for Water and Climate Platform, Coopération Facilitaire, the Youth Network for the Green Economy, AECOM, the Civil Engineering and Development Department in Hong Kong, Iowa State University, and the National Science Foundation through the Navigating the New Arctic program. So now, as we bring our event to a close, I'd like to just bring Rihanna back back to the floor.
Hi everyone. I'm sure that was a fun session. I hope you all enjoyed it. We've got a lot of interesting messages. There were a lot of inspiring quotes. But just to mainly summarize some of the three main messages that we picked up today was that we are stronger together and we need to break down silos and build networks across sectors as well as generations and borders. Youth are active and have great ideas, but they need more support to build this capacity. And this capacity could be built even through peer-to-peer as well as from intergenerational as well. And also we need innovative financing mechanisms that are adapted to the situation of young leaders from across the different communities of the world, because not everyone is in the same kind of boat. We're in the same sea, but we're not in the same boat. So I think they use that for COVID, but it does work in several different situations as well. So now we're coming to the end of our session, and I'll just probably go back to Michele to give a final thanks to our speakers. And then we have 1 minute to tell everyone good night, thank you, and good day, I guess. Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you again to all of our panelists and to Sarah for speaking at the beginning, as well as Matt in the Resilience Hub, and those who worked behind the scenes to make this happen. So Mario Lamban and Kat Brown, who you would not have seen but have been working very hard in the background. And lastly, thank you to everyone who's joined us this evening, this morning, this afternoon. We really appreciate that you've taken the time out of your day to join in this conversation. This recording, I believe, will be made available after the session. So please feel free to share the recording and share the conversation. And we look forward to seeing you again. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you.